Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I wanted to try something new in the form of a horror story, but I felt it was important to give a warning before the story. Now, some of you will listen to this, and you won't be scared at all. But if you have children or younger listeners, you may want to listen to this first and decide if it might be too scary for them. That being said, let's have some fun. I'm happy to introduce Night Terrors from the Ranger's Grove. Welcome to Night Terrors at the Ranger's Grove. Tonight's tale is about cute little fairies having a campout. What could go wrong? The air was warm, the sky a rich tapestry of twinkling stars as a group of young fairies sat around a flickering campfire in the heart of the enchanted forest. The fire's light cast dancing shadows on their delicate wings, their laughter and chatter echoing through the trees. They were in high spirits, the adventure of the evening filling them with joy and camaraderie. It was a new moon night, and the absence of the moon's light gave the forest an otherworldly feel. Lila, the most curious and daring of the fairies, looked up at the sky and noticed the darkened moon. "Hey, have you all ever heard the legend of Kharos mini-wings?" she asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The fairies quieted down, their attention now fully on Lila. "Who's that?" asked Puck, his emerald green wings fluttering with nervous curiosity. Lila leaned closer to the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Kharos mini-wings is a dark fae, a creature of nightmares. They say he collects the wings of all the fairies he has killed and sews them onto his back. And that is how you hear his approach. When all the wings are beating at once, it sounds like a humming horde of demonic locusts." The group shuddered collectively, the eerie description sending chills down their spines. "On nights like tonight, when there's no moon," Lila continued, "he roams the forest in search of any fairy who dares to write his name. If you do, he will appear, kill you, then rip off your wings and sew them onto his own back." Silence fell over the group. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Then, one by one, the fairies burst into nervous laughter, trying to shake off the fear the story had instilled in them. "That's just an old legend," said Nyx, his laughter ringing out a bit too loudly. "There's no such thing as Kharos mini-wings." The other fairies agreed, nodding and chuckling as they tried to convince themselves of the absurdity of the tale. Soon, their laughter died down, and they began to prepare for bed, their small makeshift hammocks swaying gently between the branches. As the fire burned low, its embers glowing faintly, Thistle, a mischievous young fairy with a penchant for dares, leaned over to Fern the quietest of the group. "I dare you to write Kharos' name in the dirt," he whispered, a sly grin spreading across his face. Fern's eyes widened in surprise. "No way," he whispered back. "What if the legend is true?" Thistle smirked. "Are you scared of an old story? Come on, don't be a coward." Fern's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He didn't want to seem afraid in front of his friends. Reluctantly, he agreed. "Fine," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'll do it." With hesitant movements, Fern used a small stick to scrawl the name Kharos in the dirt near the dying fire. He and Thistle quietly watched and waited, their hearts pounding. But nothing happened. The forest remained still, and the other fairies slept soundly in their hammocks. Fern let out a sigh of relief. "See, it's just a story," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. Thistle nodded in agreement, and they both settled in their hammocks, sleep gradually overtaking them. The night deepened, and the fire dwindled to mere embers. Suddenly, Fern and Thistle were jolted awake by a sound they heard quietly at first. What was that sound? They didn't recognize it. It sounded like insects. But it was getting closer, louder. Their eyes went wide, staring at each other, their mouths hanging open. Could it be? Could it really be? They tried to deny what was playing in their own minds. The sound grew louder. Then it stopped. Fern and Thistle frozen in place, too scared to move. Their eyes locked with each other. There was stillness around them. No sounds. Nothing moved. Then Fern heard the raspy breathing. He looked up to see the form of Kharos. Standing over 7 feet tall, Kharos had an emaciated yet sinewy frame, his skin an unnatural shade of ashen gray, almost translucent in places where veins and muscles were starkly visible. His face was gaunt, with sharp, angular features that seemed carved from stone. Deep-set, glowing crimson eyes burned with a cold, unyielding fury, their intensity enough to chill the air around him. His mouth was a twisted snarl, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that seemed more fitting for a predatory beast than a fairy. But the most terrifying aspect of Kharos was his wings. His back was an eerie patchwork of mismatched fairy wings sewn together in a grotesque display of his countless victims. The wings varied in size, shape, and color, each one a grim trophy of a life he had taken. The stitches were crude, the thread a dark, glistening substance that could only be blood. The wings themselves were in various states of decay, some fresh and vibrant, others tattered and faded, their beauty marred by the brutality of their removal. Kharos' eyes gleamed with malevolence as he reached down and grabbed Fern, lifting him effortlessly into the air. Fern's scream was cut short as Kharos thrust his arm into the young fairy's chest, pulling out his still-beating heart with a sickening squelch. Blood splattered onto the ground as Kharos dropped Fern's lifeless body. The other fairies remained asleep, as if under a spell, oblivious to the horror unfolding around them. But Thistle watched in paralyzed terror as Kharos meticulously ripped off Fern's wings and began sewing them onto his own back. The sight was ghastly, the sound of needle-piercing flesh mingling with Kharos' raspy breaths. Once he finished, Kharos returned his attention to Thistle, his face contorted into a vicious grin. With a deliberate, menacing motion, Kharos scratched out his name written in the dirt, then slowly shook his head at Thistle, as if to say, "Don't." Thistle could only watch, trembling as Kharos' grin widened, and he began to walk off into the darkness. His raspy breath and the sound of his many wings, now including Fern's, faded into the night, leaving Thistle alone with his fear and the gruesome memory of Fern's death. Thistle remained frozen for what felt like hours, his body trembling and his mind racing. The silence of the forest was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. He glanced around, seeing the peaceful faces of his sleeping friends, blissfully unaware of the terror that had just transpired. Eventually, the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, casting a soft glow over the campsite. The other fairies stirred, stretching and yawning, their wings fluttering gently. As they awoke, they noticed the horror etched on Thistle's face, and the lifeless, twisted body of Fern laying in a pool of his own blood, his heart laying next to him. A collective gasp arose from the group, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Lila knelt beside Fern, her hands trembling as she gently touched his cold, lifeless form. "You wrote his name, didn't you?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of anger and fear. "Didn't you?" Thistle nodded, tears streaming down his face. I didn't believe it was real," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought it was just a story." "The legends are real, and we need to respect them," Lila said. Together, they picked up the lifeless form of Fern and made their way through the forest. The fairies couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sent shivers down their spines. They kept glancing over their shoulders, half expecting to see Kharos emerging from the shadows. Poor Thistle. I guess he won't be going camping again anytime soon, will he? Sweet nightmares.